The air in the Senate hearing room was thick with the scent of old paper, expensive cologne, and simmering animosity. Adam Schiff, a man tailored not just in fabric but in ambition, stood as if carved from the very marble of the Capitol itself. He saw the world as a courtroom, and today he was the lead prosecutor. His target, Senator John Kennedy, sat with a stillness that could be mistaken for deference. It was a fatal miscalculation. Kennedy, a man whose folksy Southern cadence was a carefully honed weapon, was not a witness to be cross-examined. He was a hunter, patiently waiting for the prey to exhaust itself in a display of dominance before revealing the trap. Schiff adjusted the microphone, the slight feedback a barely audible hiss, and leaned in. The cameras, his true audience, focused their glass eyes, ready to capture the kill. "Senator Kennedy," Schiff began, his voice a finely tuned instrument of condescension, practiced in the echo chambers of cable news studios. "Let's be clear for the American people. Your brand of politics, this folksy obstructionism, is a performance designed to undermine the very foundations of our republic for a few sound bites on Fox News." The room, stacked with Schiff's supporters, erupted in a wave of applause. They saw a hero confronting a relic. They had no idea they were witnessing the opening scene of a tragedy, and their champion was its protagonist. Schiff's words were a torrent, each one a polished stone thrown with righteous fury. "You speak of the Constitution, yet you attack the Department of Justice. You praise law and order, yet you denigrate the FBI. You wrap yourself in the flag, while setting fire to the institutions that give it meaning. This isn't oversight, Senator. It's vandalism. It's a betrayal of your oath." The reporters in the press gallery typed with a furious rhythm, their stories already taking shape. "Schiff eviscerates Kennedy, intense hearing." They were chronicling a narrative that felt pre-written, a victory lap for the progressive left. But Kennedy remained impassive. His gaze was not fixed on Schiff, but on a simple manila folder resting on the polished wood before him. It was thin, unassuming, yet it seemed to possess its own gravitational pull. A few seasoned observers, the ones who understood the subtle language of power in Washington, saw it. They saw the ghost of a smile playing on Kennedy's lips, a flicker of amusement in the face of a hurricane. They felt a shift in the room's barometric pressure, the kind that precedes a violent storm. Schiff, blinded by the spotlight and the sound of his own voice, pressed his advantage. The American people are tired of these games. They are tired of conspiracy theories disguised as patriotism. They demand truth. They demand integrity. They demand— Kennedy raised a hand, not with force, but with a quiet, unhurried grace that sliced through Schiff's momentum more effectively than any gavel. "Thank you, Congressman," he said, his Louisiana drawl coating the words in a layer of disarming politeness. The sudden silence was jarring. The applause died in the throats of the activists. The reporters looked up from their laptops. "I do admire your conviction, Mr. Chairman. Truly, it takes a certain kind of passion to speak with such certainty." He let the word certainty hang in the air, infusing it with a subtle poison. Kennedy's hands, which had been resting in his lap, now came to rest on the table, his fingers gently tapping the corner of the manila folder. "You mentioned truth, and you mentioned institutions. I agree. Those are the pillars of our nation. So, with your permission, let's have a real conversation about them." With a slowness that was itself a form of psychological warfare, he opened the folder. The faint rustle of paper was the only sound in the now breathless room. He slid out a single document, a transcript, its pages dense with text. He held it not with anger, but with a kind of surgical precision. "You see, Mr. Chairman, you've built a career on the idea that you are a guardian of truth, a protector of our most sacred institutions." He looked directly at Schiff, and the folksy charm in his eyes was replaced by something cold and hard as granite. So, I think it's only fair that we begin by examining your own relationship with the truth. Let's start with what you told the American people day after day for more than 2 years. Let's talk about Russia. The confidence on Adam Schiff's face did not vanish, but it flickered, a momentary glitch in a flawless projection. It was the first sign of a crack in the armor. Kennedy saw it. The cameras saw it. And in that moment, the entire narrative of the day was irrevocably broken. The hunter, having patiently allowed the target to walk deep into the clearing, had just revealed the steel jaws of the trap. Kennedy reached back into his folder, his movements deliberate and organized, the actions of a man who had prepared not for an argument, but for a dissection. He produced a thick stack of papers, each tabbed with a different color, a rainbow of receipts for a debt about to be collected in full. "Congressman Schiff," Kennedy began, his voice still soft, but now carrying the unmistakable weight of impending judgment. "I'd like to transport this committee back to the spring of 2017. A hopeful time for some, a fearful time for others. Do you recall your television appearance on March 20th of that year?" Schiff opened his mouth, a reflexive gesture of a man used to controlling every exchange, but Kennedy simply continued, his question rhetorical. "You were on a morning news program, and the host asked you a very direct question. Do you have evidence of collusion?" Kennedy held up the first transcript, angling it so the cameras could see the highlighted text. Your answer, and I quote for the record, was not, "We are investigating," or "There are troubling signs." Your words were, "We have evidence of collusion." Full stop. He placed the transcript down on the table with a soft finality. A month later, April 6th, another network, a different host. He produced a second transcript. You told the world, "We have more than circumstantial evidence." Another month, May 8th, yet another network. A third transcript joined the pile. You claimed, "There is direct evidence of collusion." The methodical, relentless rhythm of Kennedy's presentation began to take hold of the room. This was not a political debate. It was an indictment. Each transcript was a brick being laid in the wall of a prison, built from Schiff's own words. The gentle southern drawl, which had seemed like a charming anachronism just minutes before, now felt like the slow, steady tolling of a funeral bell. Kennedy's voice remained a steady, unhurried drone, a stark contrast to the rising panic that was beginning to ripple through the Democratic side of the room. He was no longer just a senator from Louisiana. He had transformed into the embodiment of a meticulous, unforgiving historical record. Let's continue this journey through your public statements, shall we, Mr. Chairman? Because the pattern is as revealing as it is disturbing. He pulled another transcript from his seemingly bottomless folder. June of 2017. You're on MSNBC, a network where you were always given a hero's welcome. You didn't just suggest evidence existed. You declared the evidence was, and I quote, "in plain sight," as if anyone who couldn't see it was either a fool or a co-conspirator. The words hung in the air, thick with irony. The activists in the gallery, who had been so boisterous, were now a sea of confused and troubled faces. Their champion was being systematically dismantled, not with rhetoric, but with his own documented history. July, CNN. The evidence you'd seen was now damning. By August, on NBC, it had become incontrovertible. Incontrovertible, Mr. Chairman. A powerful word. It means not open to question, undeniable, absolute. Kennedy paused, allowing the weight of that word to settle upon Schiff. He wasn't just quoting him, he was dissecting his language, exposing the calculated escalation of his claims. Month after month, show after show, Kennedy laid out the timeline of Schiff's media campaign. Each new transcript was another nail in the coffin of his credibility. The pile of documents on Kennedy's table grew, a physical monument to Schiff's public pronouncements. Finally, after cataloging a dozen such instances, Kennedy reached into his folder and produced a thick, bound report. It was over 100 pages, its cover emblazoned with a simple, damning title, A Record of Public Statements by Reppers Adam Schiff, 2017-2019. My staff, Mr. Chairman, took the liberty of compiling every single time you went on national television and made these claims. It was a significant undertaking. He held the document up for the cameras, its thickness a visual testament to the sheer volume of the deception. 103 times, Congressman. 103 separate occasions where you looked directly into a camera and told the American people that you, Adam Schiff, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, had seen proof of collusion, direct evidence, damning evidence, incontrovertible evidence. He set the compilation down with a soft thud that echoed in the cavernous silence. He folded his hands, the picture of patience, and fixed his gaze on Schiff. The pale blue eyes, magnified slightly by his glasses, seemed to strip away every layer of Schiff's carefully constructed public persona. "So, Mr. Chairman," Kennedy said, his voice dropping into a near whisper that forced everyone to lean in. "It's been years now. The investigations are over. The reports have been written. The dust has settled. So, I ask you, on behalf of the American people you swore to represent, show us." The challenge was so simple, so direct, it was devastating. Show this committee the evidence. Show the millions of Americans who trusted you. Show us the direct, damning, incontrovertible evidence of collusion that you promised them existed. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum, where all political spin and rhetorical deflection ceased to exist. Adam Schiff's face, once a mask of supreme confidence, had become a canvas of conflicting emotions: anger, humiliation, and the dawning horror of a man who realizes he is cornered. His hands, which had gestured with such authority, were now gripping the edge of the table as if to steady himself. The evidence was classified at the time of my statements," Schiff stammered, his voice thin and reedy, a pale imitation of its earlier strength. Kennedy pounced, his politeness evaporating like morning mist. "Was, Congressman," he repeated, isolating the past tense verb and turning it into a weapon. "Was classified. That implies it is no longer classified. That implies that this evidence, this proof you spoke of so freely for 2 years, can now be presented. So, by all means, present it. The American people are waiting." Schiff's lawyers, sensing the disaster unfolding, leaned in, whispering frantically. He waved them away, a gesture of panicked defiance. But Kennedy was already moving on, pulling another, thicker document from his folder. This one bore the official seal of the Department of Justice. "Because here is the problem, Mr. Chairman," Kennedy continued, his voice regaining its cold, prosecutorial edge. "This is the final report from Special Counsel John Durham, a multi-year, multi-million-dollar investigation. And Mr. Durham, unlike you, was not offering opinions on cable news. He was gathering sworn testimony and forensic evidence." He flipped through the report to a pre-marked page. And his conclusion is rather stark. I'll read it directly, so as not to be accused of parody. The jab was subtle, but landed with precision. Neither U.S. law enforcement nor the intelligence community appears to have possessed any actual evidence of collusion in their holdings at the commencement of the Crossfire Hurricane investigation. He looked up, letting the words sink in. "No actual evidence, Mr. Chairman. At the very beginning, the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, they had nothing. The entire investigation, according to this official report, was predicated on a lie. A lie funded by your political allies, the Steele dossier, which you yourself cited on television as credible." Kennedy set the Durham report aside and picked up one final, chilling document. It was marked with classification stamps, crossed out with bold red lines indicating it had been recently declassified. The air in the room grew colder. This was not a public report. This was a glimpse behind the curtain. "But this, Congressman," Kennedy said, his voice now barely a whisper, "this is the part that I believe transcends politics and enters the realm of a profound and deliberate betrayal." He held up the declassified testimony. "This is a transcript from a closed, classified briefing of the Gang of Eight, held on March 8, 2017. You were there, Mr. Chairman. As the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, you were in that room." He read from the document, his voice slow and deliberate, each word a hammer blow. The Gang of Eight was briefed that the ongoing investigation had, to date, found no evidence of collusion, coordination, or conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russian government officials. He placed the document on the table as if it were a sacred text. March 8, 2017. You were officially informed, in a classified setting by our nation's top intelligence officials, that there was no evidence. Kennedy then reached over and picked up the very first transcript he had introduced. And then, 12 days later, on March 20th, you went on national television and told the American people that you had evidence of collusion. The room erupted. The carefully maintained decorum shattered into 1,000 pieces. Shouts of "liar" and "resign" echoed from the Republican side. The few remaining Democrats looked at Schiff not with support, but with a dawning sense of horror and betrayal. The media gallery was a whirlwind of motion, reporters scrambling to file updates, their original narrative now a smoldering ruin. Kennedy let the chaos swell for a moment before raising his voice, not to shout, but to cut through the noise with cold, hard clarity. You knew, Mr. Chairman. You knew there was no evidence. You had been briefed. You had seen the raw intelligence. And you went on television anyway. 103 times. You didn't just mislead the American people. You lied. You used the authority of your office, the credibility that comes with access to our nation's deepest secrets, to knowingly, willfully, and repeatedly perpetuate a lie. He leaned back in his chair, the Southern gentleman returning, but his smile was gone, replaced by a look of profound contempt. That is not a mistake, Congressman. That is not a misinterpretation. That is a calculated 2-year-long campaign of disinformation waged against the American public by one of the most powerful men in Congress. Adam Schiff's face had become a bloodless mask. The carefully cultivated image of a righteous prosecutor had been stripped away, revealing a man drowning in the undertow of his own words. He opened his mouth, but the response that emerged was weak, a pathetic shield against a tidal wave of evidence. "I stand by the work of the committee," he managed, his voice cracking under the immense pressure. "We conducted thorough and necessary oversight." Kennedy's reply was instantaneous, a rapier thrust of a question. "Do you stand by your statements on television, Mr. Chairman?" The room fell silent again, hanging on the answer. "Do you stand by your claim of having direct evidence when you had been officially briefed that no such evidence existed?" The question was a perfect trap with no path to escape. To say yes was to admit to being a liar. To say no was to admit he had misled the country for years. Schiff's lawyers were a blur of frantic whispers in his ear, but their legal advice was useless against the brutal simplicity of the truth. He tried to deflect, to find a third way that didn't exist. "The intelligence I reviewed led me to believe—" Kennedy cut him off, his voice laced with surgical disdain. "A moment ago, you said you stood by your statements. Now, you are saying you believed something. Which is it, Congressman? Did you have the evidence you claim to have on 103 separate occasions, or were you merely operating on a belief, a feeling, a political hope, directly contradicted by the classified information you were privy to?" The distinction was devastating. One was a statement of fact. The other was an admission of faith-based politics, presented to the public as gospel. There was no good answer, and the silence that stretched after Kennedy's question was Schiff's only reply. In that silence, a single powerful event occurred. A senior Democrat on the committee, a man who had served alongside Schiff for over a decade, slowly and deliberately began to gather his papers. He didn't slam them down or make a scene. He simply organized his files, closed his briefcase, stood up, and walked out of the hearing room. He didn't look at Schiff. He didn't look at Kennedy. He just left. The cameras followed him, capturing the quiet act of abandonment. The symbolic power of his departure was immense. It was the first rat leaving a sinking ship, a visual confirmation that Schiff was now toxic, indefensible even to his own allies. Kennedy, who missed nothing, acknowledged the departure with a slight, knowing nod. That ghost of a smile returned to his lips, not of humor, but of vindication. But the Russia hoax, as it has come to be known, was just the overture, wasn't it, Mr. Chairman? He reached for a new, even thicker section of his folder, this one tabbed in an ominous shade of crimson. Let's move on from what you said and start discussing what you did. Let's talk about how you allegedly weaponized your position as chairman of the Intelligence Committee. Let's talk about the illegal disclosure of classified information. Adam Schiff's hands, which had been gripping the table, were now visibly trembling. A slight tremor, but in the hyper-focused environment of the hearing, it was a seismic event. Everyone saw it. The hunter had wounded his prey, and now he was moving in for the kill. I want to walk this committee, and the American people, through a pattern, Kennedy said, his voice taking on the tone of a lecturer explaining a complex but damning equation. He unfurled a large, color-coded chart, meticulously prepared, and large enough for every camera to capture. It was a web of dates, events, and media publications, with lines connecting them in an undeniable sequence. January 10th, 2017, he began, tracing a line on the chart with his finger. The House Intelligence Committee, of which you were the ranking member, holds a top-secret briefing on the Russia investigation. The information discussed is among the most sensitive our nation possesses. Signals intelligence, human source reports. Lives and operations are at stake. He moved his finger to the next entry. January 11th, 2017. Less than 24 hours later, the New York Times publishes a front-page story titled Intercepted Russian Communications, Part of Inquiry into Trump Associates. The article contains specific details, specific pieces of intelligence that were discussed only in that classified briefing the day before. He paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. One day, Mr. Chairman, a single day between secrets being shared in a secure vault and those same secrets appearing on the front page of a newspaper. Kennedy then proceeded to walk through the chart, his voice a relentless metronome of accusation. February 3rd, a classified briefing on Michael Flynn. February 4th, a CNN exclusive containing details from that briefing. March 7th, a classified briefing on Paul Manafort. March 8th, a Washington Post story citing sources familiar with that briefing. April 2nd, a briefing on the Carter Page FISA warrant. April 3rd, an MSNBC report detailing the contents of the FISA application. The pattern was sickeningly clear. On and on it went. A drumbeat of betrayal. 43 times. 43 separate instances over 2 years where classified information from Schiff's committee was leaked to the press within 24 to 48 hours. Someone in those briefings was committing a federal crime, Mr. Chairman, Kennedy stated, his voice hard as steel. Someone was violating Title 18, U.S. Code, Section 798, the unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Someone was taking our nation's secrets and feeding them to reporters to fuel a political narrative. Who do you suppose that someone was, Congressman? Before Schiff could formulate a denial, Kennedy produced another document. This one had the official letterhead of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This, he said, holding it up, is what is known as an FBI 302, the report of an agent's interview. This particular 302 documents an interview with a former staffer of yours on the Intelligence Committee, someone who worked directly for you. The room held its breath. This was no longer about inference. This was about to become about testimony. Kennedy began to read from the report, his Louisiana drawl, making the bureaucratic language sound all the more damning. Question to the staffer. Did you have conversations with members of the media about classified information? Answer. Yes. Chairman Schiff directed me to brief certain reporters on classified matters. The words landed like a physical blow. Question. Can you describe the process? Answer. After classified briefings, Chairman Schiff would meet with me. He would provide talking points about what information to share and which reporters to contact. He said we needed to get our narrative out to counter the White House. The final questions and answers were the most devastating. Question. Did you understand this to be an authorized disclosure? Answer. No. The chairman made it clear these were sensitive conversations and should be handled discreetly. He referred to certain reporters as friendlies who could be trusted. Question. How many times did this occur? Answer. At least 14 times that I can specifically recall. The room exploded into chaos. The remaining reporters were shouting questions simultaneously. Republicans were on their feet, demanding Schiff be placed under oath. The Democratic side was a frantic mess of whispered phone calls and horrified expressions. Kennedy, the calm eye of the hurricane, raised his voice just enough to be heard over the din. This staffer, Mr. Chairman, was later fired. The official reason was inappropriate behavior. The FBI investigated, but curiously, no charges were ever brought. It seems someone was protected. He looked at Schiff, whose face was now a pale greenish hue. You used your own staff to break the law, to leak secrets, and then you cut them loose when they became a liability. Is that the kind of leadership you're so proud of, Mr. Chairman? Kennedy let the damning testimony from the FBI report settle, allowing the image of Schiff sacrificing a subordinate to fester in the minds of everyone watching. But we don't need to rely on the word of a single staffer, do we, Mr. Chairman? He continued, his voice dripping with prosecutorial sarcasm. Because in the modern world, everything leaves a digital footprint. Everything. He produced a new set of documents, this time a series of printed screenshots, text messages, call logs, metadata, all recently declassified after years of being stonewalled by Freedom of Information Act requests. These, he announced, holding up a page for the cameras to capture, are text messages between you and another member of this very committee, Congressman Eric Swalwell. The mention of another member's name sent a fresh shockwave through the room. This was no longer just an attack on Schiff, it was an exposure of a conspiracy. Kennedy began to read from the printed messages, his voice cold and clear. April 5, 2017, at 9:47 p.m. A message from your phone to Congressman Swalwell's phone. It reads, "Talk to our friend at MSNBC. Story will run at 11. Watch it." He put the page down and picked up another. April 10th, another message from you to Mr. Swalwell. We need to coordinate on the next one. Make sure to emphasize the classified nature of the intel. Makes it more credible. Kennedy looked up from the page, his eyes locking onto Schiff's. The contempt in his gaze was palpable. You weren't just leaking, Mr. Chairman. You were coordinating leaks with another member of Congress. You were strategizing on how to make the illegally disclosed information more impactful, more credible, by highlighting its classified origins. You were using the very sanctity of our national security process as a marketing tool for your political narratives. He set the text messages down and picked up a heavy legal volume, its pages tabbed and worn. For those at home who may not be familiar with the specific statute, let me read from Title 18, United States Code, Section 798. He read the words slowly, as if delivering a sentence. Whoever knowingly and willfully communicates, furnishes, transmits, or otherwise makes available to an unauthorized person, or publishes classified information, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both. He closed the book with a sharp snap. 10 years, Mr. Chairman. That's the maximum sentence for each count. And by our tally, we have a pattern of 43 separate leaks from your committee. 43 potential federal crimes. Adam Schiff, who had been shrinking in his chair, seemed to find a last reservoir of defiance. These allegations are baseless and taken completely out of context, he exclaimed, his voice strained and high-pitched. I was conducting legitimate oversight of the executive branch. The word oversight was a match thrown on gasoline. Kennedy's calm demeanor finally broke, his voice cracking like a whip through the room. Oversight. You call leaking classified information to friendly reporters oversight? You call coordinating with other members of Congress to plant stories in the media oversight? You call, by my count, violating federal law 43 times oversight? He leaned forward, his folksy persona completely gone, replaced by a man filled with righteous fury. The Southern gentleman had left the building. You weaponized the House Intelligence Committee, Mr. Chairman. You took one of the most sacred positions of trust in this entire government, a position that demands absolute integrity and discretion, and you turned it into your own personal propaganda machine. He began gathering the documents related to the leaks, his movements sharp and angry. This wasn't just about damaging a president you despised. You put sources and methods at risk. You compromised ongoing intelligence operations. You endangered the lives of the very assets, the human beings, our intelligence community relies on to keep this country safe. His voice dropped again, but this time it was not a whisper of strategy, but of raw, unfiltered anger. It carried more weight than any shout. That is not oversight, Mr. Chairman. That is not politics. That is a betrayal of the highest order. Some might even call it treasonous. The word treasonous hung in the air, a formal accusation he couldn't make, but a moral judgment that was now seared into the record. The effect was immediate. 2 more Democratic members of the committee, their faces pale with shock, quietly gathered their belongings and walked out. The exodus was becoming a rout. The gallery of activists, once a vibrant sea of support, had dwindled to a few shell-shocked individuals who looked as though they had just discovered their church was built on a toxic waste dump. Kennedy took a deep breath, his composure returning as he straightened his papers. The Southern gentleman was back, but now everyone understood the steel that lay beneath the velvet. But we are not finished, Mr. Chairman, he said, that slight, chilling smile returning to his face. We've discussed your lies. We've discussed your leaks. Now, let's discuss your donors. Let's talk about what they received in exchange for their generosity. Let's talk about a man named Ed Buck. If it were possible, Adam Schiff's face went even whiter. The blood seemed to drain from him entirely. This was a name he knew well, a ghost from his own district, a scandal he had desperately tried to avoid. He knew what was coming next, and it was not about politics or procedure. It was about morality. It was about to get much, much worse. Kennedy's hand moved to a different section of his folder, this one tabbed in a stark, blood-red color. He pulled out the first document. It was not a classified report or a secret transcript, but a simple, public document. A Federal Election Commission filing, listing campaign contributions. Congressman Schiff, Kennedy began, his voice shifting again, taking on a tone of cold, clinical disappointment. Let's talk about Mr. Edward Buck, a prolific donor to the Democratic Party. Are you familiar with him? The question was pure theater. Of course he was. The silence in the room was now suffocating. The name Ed Buck was infamous in California political circles, a name synonymous with scandal, depravity, and death. Schiff's jaw was clenched so tight a muscle pulsed in his cheek. I returned Mr. Buck's donations, he said through gritted teeth. After his arrest, Kennedy seized on the last 3 words, repeating them slowly, loading them with significance. After his arrest. Yes, you did, in October of 2019. But the story, Mr. Chairman, is not about that convenient, politically necessary gesture. The story is about the 2 years of silence that came before it. Kennedy laid out a series of glossy photographs on the table, each one date-stamped, each a snapshot from a life Schiff wished could be forgotten. "This is you and Mr. Ed Buck at a fundraiser in Los Angeles, August 2015, Kennedy announced, holding up the first image. It showed the two men smiling, drinks in hand, the picture of a cozy politician-donor relationship. Here you are again, March 2016, at a California Democratic Party gala. You were seated at Mr. Buck's table. He was a major sponsor of the event, donating $50,000. More photos followed, painting a clear picture of access and familiarity. And here, June 2017, your own campaign fundraiser, Mr. Buck, front and center. Kennedy set the photos aside and picked up a campaign finance report. Mr. Buck was a generous and reliable donor. He gave the maximum legal amount to your campaign, and he bundled thousands more for your colleagues, a pillar of the Democratic fundraising community. He paused, letting the image of this close relationship solidify. But this is where the timeline becomes uncomfortable, Mr. Chairman. He produced a printed news article, its headline stark and brutal. Young man dies at Democratic donor's home. July 27, 2017, Kennedy read, his voice devoid of emotion. A 26-year-old man named Gemmill Moore dies of a methamphetamine overdose at Ed Buck's apartment in West Hollywood. That's your district, isn't it, Congressman? These are your constituents. The accusation was implicit, but powerful. This was not a distant policy debate. This was a tragedy that unfolded on Schiff's home turf. The sheriff's department investigates, Kennedy continued, his voice hardening. They find Mr. Moore's journal. The contents are deeply disturbing, describing a pattern of behavior by Mr. Buck, luring young, vulnerable, predominantly black men to his apartment, providing them with drugs and exploiting them. Activists in the community, particularly in the LGBTQ community, begin to sound the alarm. They protest. They demand action, and they contact their elected officials. They contact your office, Mr. Chairman. From the crimson-tabbed section of his folder, Kennedy pulled a thick stack of letters, bound together with a clip. These are copies of letters sent to your congressional office between August 2017 and September 2019. 23 letters in total, all from your constituents, all expressing grave concerns about Ed Buck, all pleading with you to do something, to at least disavow him by returning his tainted money. He began to read from the first letter, its words a desperate plea from the past. Dear Congressman Schiff, we are writing to urge you to return any donations from Ed Buck and to speak out about the death of Gemmill Moore. Our community is being targeted. We need our representatives to stand with us, not with wealthy predators. That was dated August 15, 2017, Mr. Chairman. Just weeks after Mr. Moore's death, he set it down and picked up another. November 20, 2017. We are writing again to ask why you have remained silent. More information has emerged about his pattern of behavior. We are afraid. March 8, 2018. This is the 5th letter we have sent. We have received no response. Why are you protecting this man? The letters painted a damning portrait of neglect, of a representative who was deaf to the cries of his most vulnerable constituents. Kennedy's voice grew colder with each letter he read. Then he paused, and his voice dropped to a somber, heavy tone. January 7, 2019. Timothy Dean, another young black man, dies of a methamphetamine overdose at Ed Buck's apartment. A second death? Same apartment, same man, same circumstances. The room was utterly still. This was no longer about political hypocrisy. It was about human lives. The protests grow larger, Kennedy said, his voice a low growl. The community in your district is begging you for help. They are not asking for a new law or a federal program. They are asking for a simple moral gesture. Speak out. Distance yourself from this man who is preying on your constituents. Return his money. He held up another set of campaign finance reports. But you didn't, did you? Not after the first death, not after the second death. For 2 years, while young men were dying and your constituents were pleading, you kept Ed Buck's money in your campaign account. You remained silent. Kennedy then produced a list, a comparison. Let's see how some of your Democratic colleagues handled the situation, shall we? Mayor Eric Garcetti of Los Angeles returned his donations from Buck in November 2017, just a few months after the first death. State Senator Kevin De Leon returned his money in August 2017, 1 month after Gemmill Moore died. They saw the moral imperative. They listened to the community. They acted. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Schiff. But you, Mr. Chairman, you did nothing. You held on to that money through 23 letters, through a second death, through protests outside your own office. You only decided to return Ed Buck's $2,700 in October of 2019, after a third man nearly died but managed to escape, leading to Buck's final arrest by federal agents. He let the timeline sink in, a damning indictment of calculated political calculus over basic human decency. 2 men died, Mr. Chairman, Kennedy whispered, but the whisper carried the force of a scream. 2 young black men, with families and futures, and their community begged you to simply acknowledge their fear. But you stayed silent. Was it because Ed Buck was a reliable donor? Was his money, that couple of $1,000s, worth more than their lives? Did politics matter more than people? A young man in the gallery, wearing a T-shirt that read, "Justice for Gemmill," stood up, his face a mask of pure disgust, and walked out. His silent protest was more powerful than any shout. Kennedy wasn't finished. He gestured to another stack of financial documents. But Mr. Buck isn't the only troubling pattern in your donor history, is he, Congressman? Let's talk about your friends in big tech. Let's see what they got for their money. He spread out years of FEC filings. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, thousands upon thousands of dollars flowing into your campaign from their executives and employees. Perfectly legal, of course, but let's look at the legislation you championed after those donations were made. He pulled out bill records. House Resolution 4173, a bill to expand Section 230 liability shields for tech platforms. You co-sponsored it. Senate Bill 3647, a data privacy bill so full of loopholes for large platforms that it would have crushed smaller competitors while leaving Google and Facebook untouched. You advocated for it. The pattern is clear, Congressman. Donations flow in from tech executives, and legislation beneficial to their companies flows out of your office. Round and round it goes. He held up his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. Again, that's how Washington works, some might say, but it's certainly illuminating. It shows who you work for. And it wasn't the young men in your district being preyed upon by Ed Buck. It was the wealthy executives in Silicon Valley. The few remaining Democrats on the committee looked physically ill. One of them was seen discreetly removing a Schiff for Senate 2024 campaign pin from her lapel and slipping it into her pocket. The gesture was small, but its meaning was monumental. Kennedy gathered his papers, his methodical precision a stark contrast to the moral chaos he had just unleashed. "We're not done, Mr. Chairman," he said, his voice low and ominous. He reached for the thickest folder yet, a tome of a file that seemed to dwarf all the others. "We haven't even discussed your magnum opus, your masterpiece of political deception. Let's talk about the Ukraine impeachment. Let's talk about the whistleblower you claimed you never met." Adam Schiff looked as though he might physically collapse. His face, already pale, had taken on a sickly, greenish tint. His lawyers were no longer whispering. They were practically pleading with him, their gestures frantic, likely urging him to invoke his right to remain silent, to walk out, to do anything to stop the bleeding. But he was paralyzed, a man trapped in a nightmare of his own making, with the entire nation watching. Kennedy, sensing the finality of the moment, opened the last, thickest folder. The atmosphere in the room shifted from a political hearing to something resembling a tribunal for crimes against the state. "Let's discuss your star witness, Mr. Chairman," Kennedy began, his voice dropping back to that deadly quiet register that had become his signature weapon. "The anonymous whistleblower, the one you swore on national television you had no prior contact with. The complaint you claimed to know nothing about before it was filed. The investigation you insisted was wholly independent of your office. Let's discuss how all of that was a carefully constructed lie." From the folder, he produced page after page of phone records, their columns of dates, times, and call durations authenticated with official seals. "September 17, 2019, Kennedy started, his cadence that of a prosecutor laying out an irrefutable timeline. "You appeared on MSNBC, and you were asked directly if you or your committee had spoken to the whistleblower. Your exact words were, 'We have not spoken directly with the whistleblower. We would like to.' Future tense, Mr. Chairman. We would like to." A clear implication that no contact had yet been made. He set down the transcript of the interview and held up the phone logs. These call logs, obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request and recently declassified, tell a very, very different story. They document 17 separate phone calls between your senior committee staff and a CIA analyst, all taking place before you went on television and claimed you had no contact. He began to read the dates and durations, each one a hammer blow to Schiff's credibility. August 12, 2019, a 43-minute call. August 14th, 19 minutes. August 21st, 1 hour and 12 minutes. August 28th, September 4th, September 9th. He paused for dramatic effect, letting the weight of the 17 calls sink in. Then he delivered the coup de grace. And that CIA analyst, Mr. Chairman, that CIA analyst was the whistleblower. The room erupted. It was a detonation of outrage and disbelief. This was the smoking gun. This was direct, documented proof that Schiff had not only lied about his contact with the whistleblower, but had been intimately involved with him for weeks before the complaint became public. The entire impeachment narrative, the story of a brave, independent patriot coming forward, was revealed as a coordinated political operation. The few remaining reporters scrambled, shouting into their phones. The Republican side of the committee was in an uproar. Even the nonpartisan committee staffers looked at Schiff with open contempt. Kennedy raised his voice just enough to be heard over the pandemonium. "But wait," he said, borrowing a line from a late-night infomercial that, in this context, was utterly devastating. "There's more." He pulled out another set of documents, printed text messages, authenticated with metadata. "These are text messages between your staff and the whistleblower, also recently declassified. Let me read you a few." He began to read, his voice clear and steady. "August 23rd, 2019. Your staffer to the whistleblower. Have you started drafting the complaint? We can review it if you'd like guidance on format and what to include." The whistleblower's response, "Working on a draft now. Would definitely appreciate your input." He picked up another. September 2nd. Your staffer writes, "The complaint looks good. Make sure you file it through the IG's office. That's the proper channel. We'll be ready on our end once it's filed." The whistleblower's response, "Will do. Thanks for all the help. Should I delete these messages?" Kennedy looked up from the page, a cold fire in his eyes. "And your staffer's response, Mr. Chairman? Probably a good idea." The gasp in the room was audible. This was not just coordination. This was coaching. This was manufacturing. This was a conspiracy to create a whistleblower complaint, and it included an attempt to cover their tracks by deleting the evidence. "They didn't delete them thoroughly enough, Mr. Chairman," Kennedy said, tapping the stack of messages. "Because here they are. Your office didn't just know the whistleblower. Your office didn't just talk to the whistleblower. Your office helped create the whistleblower. You guided him, You reviewed his work. You orchestrated the entire event. And then you went on national television and lied about it to the American people. He wasn't finished. He gestured for a video to be played on the room's large monitors. But that wasn't even the most egregious part of your performance, Mr. Chairman. The worst part came on September 26, 2019, at the very first public hearing of the impeachment inquiry. The video began to play, showing Adam Schiff, his face a mask of solemn gravity, delivering his opening statement. He claimed he was summarizing the phone call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky, but the words that came out of his mouth were a grotesque mob boss caricature. "I'm going to say this only 7 times, so you better listen good," the video Schiff said, his voice dripping with fake menace. "I want you to make up dirt on my political opponent. Understand? Lots of it." Kennedy stopped the video. "Quite a performance, Mr. Chairman. Very dramatic. It certainly made the president sound like a mafia don. And your clip went viral. The media played it on a loop for days. Millions of Americans had their opinion of that phone call shaped not by the actual transcript, but by your fictionalized parody version." He held up the official White House transcript of the call. "The only problem is, those words were never said, not even close. When you were called out on it, you claimed it was parody, Mr. Chairman. During a formal impeachment hearing to decide the fate of a presidency, you chose that moment to invent dialogue, put words in the president's mouth that he never spoke, and you presented it to the world as fact." He leaned forward, his voice filled with contempt. "How many millions of people, Mr. Chairman, formed their opinion based on your lie? How many of your colleagues in the House voted for impeachment based on a narrative you knowingly fabricated? That wasn't oversight. That was a deliberate act of political sabotage, using the authority of your office as a stage for your own fiction." The foundation of Schiff's career was now nothing but rubble. The lies, the leaks, the moral failures, and now the orchestration of a constitutional crisis had been laid bare for all to see. He was no longer a powerful chairman. He was a defendant in the court of public opinion, and the verdict was brutally, undeniably clear. Kennedy continued his relentless dissection of the impeachment process, his voice a steady scalpel cutting through layers of political spin. "And then there was the matter of the witnesses, Mr. Chairman. An investigation is only as credible as the evidence it is willing to consider. But your inquiry wasn't an investigation. It was a show trial, and you were the director, the producer, and the lead actor." He produced another list, this one detailing the witnesses the Republican minority had requested to call. "Let's talk about who you refused to let testify," he said, reading from the list. "Hunter Biden, the individual at the center of the Ukraine controversy. Blocked. Alexandra Chalupa, the DNC operative who had worked with the Ukrainian embassy to dig up dirt on the Trump campaign in 2016. Blocked. And most tellingly, the whistleblower himself, the man whose complaint started the entire process. Blocked. You hid your star witness from public scrutiny, from any form of cross-examination, because you knew that any real questioning would expose the coordination between him and your office." Kennedy tossed the list onto the growing pile of evidence. "You blocked any witness, any piece of evidence that might have complicated your pre-written narrative. You controlled the flow of information with an iron fist, ensuring that only one side of the story was ever told." He then held up another timeline, this one cross-referencing the dates of closed-door testimony with the dates of media publications. And, of course, your old pattern returned. The selective leaks. Testimony that was helpful to your case would miraculously appear in the press, often just hours after the witness had spoken behind closed doors. Ambassador Taylor testifies on October 15th. That same evening, CNN has the most damaging quotes. Ambassador Yovanovitch testifies on October 23rd. The next morning, The Washington Post has an exclusive with the juiciest excerpts. He shook his head. a look of profound disgust on his face. You controlled the witnesses. You controlled the evidence. You controlled the media narrative. You manufactured a crisis. You coordinated with the central figure. You fabricated dialogue. And you ran a sham investigation designed to reach a predetermined conclusion. And you did it all under the guise of defending the Constitution. Finally, Kennedy reached for one last official document. It was a resolution from the House of Representatives. And eventually, Mr. Chairman, your own chamber, the very body you sought to lead, held you accountable, at least in some small way. He held up the document. House Resolution 521, passed on June 21st, 2023. The resolution to formally censure you for your conduct. He began to read from the text of the resolution. Resolved that the House of Representatives censures Representative Adam Schiff of California for misleading the American public and for conduct unbecoming of an elected member of the House of Representatives. He looked up. The vote was 213 to 209. You became only the 25th member in the entire history of the United States Congress to be formally censured, a rare and deeply serious condemnation by your own peers. Kennedy paused, letting the weight of that historical fact settle in the room. And what was your response to this profound dishonor? You held a press conference. You fundraised off of it. You called it a badge of honor. His voice dropped to a near whisper, filled with contempt. A badge of honor. To be formally rebuked by the People's House for lying to the American people. That, right there, tells us everything we need to know about your character, Mr. Chairman. You have no shame. You have no integrity. You believe yourself to be above accountability. He slowly rose to his feet, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the witness table. For the first time, his voice rose, filled with a genuine, unscripted anger that silenced the entire room. You had the trust of the American people. You had access to our nation's most sensitive secrets. You held a position of immense power and responsibility, and you abused it all. His voice boomed, echoing off the marble walls. You weaponized our intelligence community for your own political games. You lied, repeatedly, and without remorse, to the citizens you swore an oath to serve. You manufactured a constitutional crisis based on a foundation of deceit, and you did it all while wrapping yourself in the flag and claiming to be a defender of truth, democracy, and our sacred institutions. He pointed a finger directly at Schiff, the gesture a mirror image of the one Schiff had used against him at the beginning of the hearing, but now it carried the weight of an entire mountain of evidence. You, sir, are the threat to our institutions. You are the one who puts party over country. You are the very embodiment of the abuse of power you claim to oppose. And today, right here, in this room, the American people finally see you for what you truly are. The room was in absolute chaos. The remaining Democrats had fled. The gallery was empty. Even the press corps seemed stunned into silence, their faces a mixture of shock and a dawning realization of their own complicity in broadcasting Schiff's narratives for years. Adam Schiff sat frozen, a statue of a broken man, his face ashen, his hands trembling, his entire being seeming to collapse inward under the weight of the public demolition. And Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana stood tall, the evidence of his victory laid out before him, his mission of accountability nearly complete. But he had one final devastating act to perform. "We're not quite finished, Mr. Chairman," Kennedy said, his voice returning to that deadly quiet that was somehow more terrifying than his anger. He reached for his phone. "Let's talk about what happens now. Let's talk about the real-time consequences of today's revelations." He held up the phone, its screen glowing in the dim light. "While we've been sitting here, the world has been reacting. Let me share some of those reactions with you." The final act of the tragedy was about to unfold, not in the past, but in the immediate, brutal present. Kennedy's gaze shifted from Schiff to the screen of his phone. his demeanor changing from prosecutor to narrator of an unfolding political obituary. "Just moments ago," he began, his voice calm and steady, "several official statements have been released. It seems our little conversation here has been making waves." He read from his screen. A statement from the Department of Justice Office of Public Affairs, released 23 minutes ago. The department is actively reviewing the testimony and evidence presented today regarding allegations of unauthorized disclosures of classified information and will take all appropriate investigative steps. He looked up, letting the implications sink in. The Department of Justice was now officially involved. "Next," he continued, scrolling on his phone, "a statement from the House Ethics Committee, released 18 minutes ago. The committee has voted unanimously to open a formal investigation into allegations of serious misconduct by Representative Adam Schiff, including but not limited to his coordination with the Ukraine whistleblower and potential violations of House rules regarding the handling of classified information. Unanimously, Mr. Chairman. That means your own Democratic colleagues on the Ethics Committee just voted to investigate you." The news landed like a series of body blows. These were not partisan attacks. These were official, bipartisan actions from the very institutions Schiff claimed to revere. The walls were closing in real time. "And this one," Kennedy said, his voice tinged with a note of grim satisfaction, "just came in 11 minutes ago. A statement from the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. The committee has voted, again unanimously, to formally recommend the immediate suspension of Representative Schiff's access to any and all classified information pending a full security review. Unanimously, Congressman. The Republican and Democratic leadership of the Senate Intelligence Committee have jointly declared you a national security risk. They no longer trust you with our nation's secrets." Adam Schiff flinched as if he had been physically struck. To be stripped of his security clearance was the ultimate repudiation for a man who had built his entire identity around his access to classified intelligence. It was the end of his career in everything but name. "And then there are your colleagues, Mr. Chairman," Kennedy went on, the relentless narrator of Schiff's demise. "The people you served with, the allies who once stood by you." Politico just quoted a senior House Democrat, anonymously, of course, as saying, "If even half of these allegations are proven true, Representative Schiff must seriously consider resigning for the good of the party and the country." The tide is turning fast, isn't it? He scrolled further. The House Democratic Caucus leadership has released a statement. They say they are deeply troubled by the testimony and are reviewing all the evidence. Not defending you, Mr. Chairman. Not standing with you. They are deeply troubled. That's the political equivalent of seeing you drowning and checking the water temperature before deciding whether to throw you a rope. He even found a tweet. Even Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez just tweeted, and I'm reading this verbatim. "Accountability applies to everyone. Period." It seems the progressive wing of your party, the very people who cheered you on, are now preparing to cut you loose. He set down his phone, the silence in the room now heavy with the finality of it all. "They are running for the exits, Mr. Chairman. Your caucus, your leadership, your progressive champions. They are all running because they can read the writing on the wall. They know what this evidence proves. They know you are politically radioactive. They know you are finished." Kennedy gestured with an open hand toward the vast expanse of empty chairs on the Democratic side of the dais. "Look around you, Congressman. You began this hearing surrounded by your allies. How many are left? 3? The cameras dutifully panned across the deserted seats, a stark visual of his complete and utter isolation. The 3 remaining Democrats looked like they were attending a funeral, their faces grim, their posture defeated. "They abandoned you, Mr. Chairman," Kennedy said, his voice softening not with pity, but with a kind of clinical finality. "The people who defended you through the Russia investigation, who voted with you on impeachment, who stood by you during your censure. They listened to the evidence today, and they walked out. They walked out because they finally understood that you are not a hero to be defended, but a liability to be jettisoned. Schiff, summoning the last dregs of his strength, tried to rise, to offer one last, desperate defense. "This is a coordinated political attack," he croaked, his voice a strangled, pathetic version of its former self. "A partisan witch hunt, designed to silence." "Stop," Kennedy said. The single word, spoken quietly, but with the absolute authority of a man who had won, cut through Schiff's protestations like a surgeon's scalpel. "Just stop." Kennedy sat back down, folded his hands, and looked at Schiff, a flicker of something almost like pity in his eyes. "The evidence speaks for itself, Congressman. 127 exhibits, phone records, text messages, FBI reports, sworn testimony, financial disclosures, video footage, all of it authenticated, all of it verified, all of it pointing to the same inescapable conclusion." He paused. "This isn't a witch hunt, Mr. Chairman. This is accountability. This is what happens when the lies become so numerous they collapse under their own weight. This is what happens when a man who built his career accusing others of crimes is finally confronted with his own." Schiff made one last, feeble attempt. "History will vindicate me," he whispered, the words barely audible. Kennedy's reply was swift and brutal. "History will judge you a liar. History will record that you abused your office, that you weaponized our intelligence agencies, that you orchestrated a sham impeachment, and that you lied to the American people, repeatedly, for years. History will note that you were censured by your peers and abandoned by your party. History will remember that when you were finally and irrevocably confronted with the truth, you pathetically claimed to be a victim." The committee chairman, a Democrat who had begun the day as Schiff's ally, finally found his voice. It was flat, hollow, and devoid of all energy. "This committee will stand in recess," he announced, his words a surrender. He banged the gavel, the sound unnaturally loud in the still room, and quickly walked away, not even looking in Schiff's direction. The hearing was over. The destruction was complete. The sharp crack of the chairman's gavel echoed like a gunshot, signaling the official end of the proceedings and the unofficial end of Adam Schiff's career. As the few remaining attendees began to stir, two uniformed Capitol Police officers approached the witness table. Their movements were polite, professional, but firm. "Congressman," the senior officer said, his voice low and respectful, yet carrying an undeniable air of authority, "we've been instructed to escort you to the security office. You'll need to surrender your congressional credentials and all access badges, pending the security review, the final humiliation. To be stripped of his credentials, the physical symbols of his power and status, like a disgraced soldier having his stripes torn from his uniform." The walk from the witness table to the hearing room door was the longest of Adam Schiff's life. He moved as if in a trance, his body disconnected from his mind. His expensive suit, which had seemed like armor just hours before, now looked rumpled and ill-fitting. His posture, once ramrod straight with self-importance, was now slumped in defeat. He was a hollowed-out man, the ghost of a political giant. He looked around for a friendly face, a supportive aide, a loyal lawyer. There were none. His staff, the young, ambitious people who had once basked in his reflected glory, had vanished. His legal team, seeing no path to victory and no further billable hours in this venue, had packed their briefcases and departed without so much as a handshake. They would send their final invoice, but their public association with him was over. He was utterly, completely alone. As the officers escorted him past Kennedy's table, he couldn't help but look. Kennedy was not gloating. He was methodically organizing his documents, placing each transcript, each report, each piece of evidence back into his briefcase with the same precision with which he had presented it. He looked up as Schiff passed, and for a brief moment Their eyes met. Kennedy gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, the barest minimum of human courtesy, a gesture from a victor to the vanquished that offered no comfort, only a confirmation of the result. And on Kennedy's lips, that faint, knowing smile remained, the smile of a man whose meticulous preparation had met its intended outcome. Kennedy calmly finished packing his briefcase, straightened his tie, and nodded politely to the remaining committee staff. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible tip of his head toward the cameras, a gesture of acknowledgement to the audience at home, and then he walked out of the room with the same unhurried, dignified gait he'd had when he arrived. He left behind him the wreckage of a man's career, a political party in turmoil, and a series of investigations that would dominate the headlines for months. The Southern gentleman had, as promised, brought his receipts, and the debt had been paid in full. The political earthquake that Kennedy had triggered in that hearing room sent shockwaves that reshaped the landscape of Washington. The media narrative, which had for years been so favorable to Schiff, reversed itself with breathtaking speed. CNN, the network that had provided him with a platform for his collusion claims more than 100 times, aired a prime-time special titled The Schiff Dossier, An Anatomy of a Deception. MSNBC, his other home away from home, convened panels of legal experts to discuss the criminal jeopardy a sitting congressman might face for leaking classified information and obstructing justice. Social media became a bonfire of Schiff's reputation. The hashtag #LonSchiffLied trended globally for 3 consecutive days. Clips of Kennedy's most devastating moments, the reading of the text messages, the reveal of the whistleblower coordination, the cold recitation of the Ed Buck timeline, were edited, remixed, and shared millions of times, becoming viral symbols of a stunning political takedown. But the most brutal blows came from within his own party. The California Democratic Party, after a frantic emergency meeting, issued a statement strongly encouraging Schiff to announce he would not seek re-election, a polite but firm shove out the door. Major donors, the lifeblood of any political campaign, publicly announced they were closing their checkbooks to him. The progressive groups that had once hailed him as a hero scrubbed his endorsements from their websites and released statements professing their shock and disappointment, desperate to distance themselves from his toxicity. Within a week, 3 formidable Democratic challengers, including a former mentee, had announced primary campaigns against him, all running on a platform of restoring integrity and trust to the office. The official investigations proceeded with a speed rarely seen in Washington. The House Ethics Committee, under intense bipartisan pressure, issued a scathing preliminary report within 30 days, recommending a full-floor vote for expulsion. The Department of Justice, moving to quell accusations of political favoritism, formally opened a grand jury investigation into the classified leaks, and subpoenas were issued to Schiff's current and former staff. The Senate Intelligence Committee's recommendation was swiftly adopted, and Adam Schiff became the first member of Congress in modern history to have his security clearances revoked for cause. 3 months after the hearing, facing the certainty of being expelled from the House and the high probability of a federal indictment, Adam Schiff released a quiet, late Friday afternoon statement announcing he would not seek re-election. It was a defiant, self-pitying screed, casting himself as a martyr sacrificed on the altar of partisan politics. But the words were meaningless. No one was listening anymore. His party had disowned him, his constituents were preparing to replace him, and the media had moved on to the next chapter of his downfall. The criminal investigation. He was a man without a future, a politician without a platform, a ghost haunting the halls of power he had once commanded. The final defining postscript to the saga came 2 weeks after the hearing. A journalist from a major news outlet traveled to Madisonville, Louisiana, to interview the man at the center of it all. Senator John Kennedy was sitting on the back porch of his home, a simple wooden structure overlooking the placid waters of the bayou. A glass of bourbon rested in his hand as he watched the evening sun paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. When the reporter asked if he felt a sense of satisfaction at Schiff's complete and utter destruction, Kennedy was quiet for a long moment, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "No," he said finally, his Louisiana drawl as smooth and unhurried as the water before him. "I don't take any pleasure in seeing a man's life and career ruined, even when he brought it on himself." He took a slow sip. "But I do take satisfaction in this. The truth won. Accountability won. The system, for all its flaws, worked. It proved that if you have the facts on your side and you have the courage to present them, the truth can still prevail over lies." The reporter, sensing there was more to the story, pressed him. "But many are saying this was personal for you, Senator. Congressman Schiff attacked you directly in that hearing. Was this revenge?" Kennedy shook his head, a faint smile on his lips. "It may have started personal," he admitted, his honesty disarming. "When a man calls you a traitor and a vandal on national television, you tend to take notice. It certainly got my attention." He looked out over the bayou, his gaze distant, as if replaying the events in his mind. "But it became something much bigger the moment my staff started digging and I saw the evidence. The moment I understood the sheer scale of the deception. The lies about Russia, the classified leaks, the way he ignored those poor souls in his district while protecting a predator, the orchestration of the impeachment. That's when it stopped being about me versus him. It became about defending the very institutions he claimed to be protecting." The reporter asked what he thought the greatest damage Schiff had caused was. Kennedy thought for a moment, his expression turning serious. "He eroded trust," he said, his voice firm. "He made millions of Americans believe that their own government was lying to them, that our intelligence agencies were corrupt, that our oversight committees were just tools for partisan warfare. He took the natural cynicism people have for politics and poured gasoline on it. That damage, the corrosion of public trust in the fundamental relationship between the governed and the government, that's the real tragedy here. That's what will take a generation to repair." "So what should happen to him now?" the reporter asked. Kennedy smiled, that slight enigmatic smile again. "That's not for me to say. The Justice Department has its job to do. The voters in his district have already made their choice. And history? Well, history will render the final verdict." He stood up and walked to the railing of his porch, looking out at the darkening sky as the first stars began to appear. "But I'll tell you what I hope," he said, his voice taking on a tone of quiet conviction. "I hope this entire sordid affair serves as a warning, a clear and unmistakable reminder to every person in a position of power in this country. No one, no matter how powerful, no matter how well connected, no matter how celebrated by the media or protected by their party, is above the law. No one is immune to accountability. Not in this country. Not as long as there are still people willing to stand up and speak the truth." The reporter asked one final, pointed question. "What's the fundamental difference between you and Adam Schiff?" Kennedy was quiet for a long time. The sounds of the Louisiana night, the chirping of crickets, the gentle lapping of water, filling the silence. Finally, he turned to face the camera, his eyes clear and direct. "I still believe in truth," he said simply. "Not a narrative, not a political spin. Not what sounds good on television or what helps my side win. Just the plain, unvarnished, sometimes inconvenient truth. Facts. Evidence." He paused, then continued. "Adam Schiff believed in winning. He believed in the righteousness of his own cause so completely that any lie, any deception, any abuse of power was justified in his mind. He believed the ends always justified the means. He believed he could lie his way to victory and never, ever face the consequences." He picked up his bourbon glass from the railing and raised it slightly, not in a toast to himself, but as if in a toast to a principle. "And that," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, is why I am standing here on my porch, at peace with my actions, watching the sunset, and he is somewhere in a room with his lawyers, preparing for a federal indictment, his career in ashes, his name forever etched in the history books as a synonym for deceit. He took a final sip. That's the difference. I can sleep at night. The interview officially ended, but the camera lingered for a moment, capturing the solitary figure of John Kennedy on his porch, a silhouette against the deep purple of the twilight sky. As if speaking to himself, he murmured one last line, so quietly the microphone almost missed it. "The Southern gentleman," he said, with a hint of a smile in his voice, "always brings receipts. Always." The screen faded to black, leaving the audience with the powerful image of a man who had faced down corruption and won, not with shouting or theatrics, but with meticulous preparation and an unwavering belief in the power of the truth. Adam Schiff's political career was over, a casualty of his own hubris and deceit. But the story was a stark and timely reminder that while institutions can be bent and the truth can be twisted, the system of accountability, though often slow and imperfect, can still work. Justice, in the end, had been served, and America, for all its deep divisions and political turmoil, had shown that it could still, on occasion, hold its most powerful figures to account. If you believe that truth and accountability are what our nation needs most, then smash that like button, subscribe to this channel for more deep dives that expose the truth, and share this video with everyone you know who still believes that no one is above the law.